Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Not Financial Advice podcast. We are back after a week of break. So thank you for everyone joining us again. A lot to discuss. The biggest thing is that the Inflation Reduction Act has passed. Jerome Powell, chair of the Fed, gave a speech at Jackson's Hole, basically said inflation is going to be really hard to fight, and the market reacted in a pretty negative way. S&P went from about 428 to about 404. Dow Jones lost about 1,100 points. Things are not looking amazing right now, and we are here to analyze it. So, Sean, given the Inflation Reduction Act and given what Jerome Powell said and how the market is reacting, what are your current thoughts on the macro and how are you kind of navigating everything going on?
So, Amit, I've got this great new thing I was really excited to tell you about today. It's called the Weight Reduction Act. What we're going to do is we're going to go to a buffet to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We're going to focus on eating as much as we possibly can, but thinking really hard about losing weight while we do it. It's going to be the Weight Reduction Act because it's got a cool name. It's going to do absolutely nothing. And you're still going to not
Sounds
feel
very metaversy.
It's very metaversy. and yeah, man. And this is what I've been thinking about the past couple of days, really sort of getting more and more concerned about what I'm seeing from a macro perspective, but really talking macro US for sort of our show today. So look, here's what we know, right? On August 16th, Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which by all standards, based on the name, one would imagine its goal is to reduce inflation.
Real quick, Sean, you're a little older than me. You've seen these bills get passed with these like pseudo ridiculous names. Is it just a marketing thing? Because you can't imagine 100 years from now it's going to be called the Inflation like it's just for the moment, right?
This current time period we're in is going to go down in history as the most embarrassing time in our political history, without a doubt. It's embarrassing. The way nothing at all is based on reality. It's based on politics and getting votes. And I mean both sides. There is no blame one or the other here. It's absolutely insane the way we're doing things right now. Everything is about getting votes, whether it's Inflation Reduction Acts that have been proven to not have any effect on reducing inflation, or it's student loans, or it's PPP forgiveness, or it's worrying about how fair space rockets are. We are at a point right now where we're treating global economics and the planet as nothing more than a way to get votes to go one way or the other. And it's really hard to, I think, have a reasonable debate on facts that what I'm saying is not real. I think there's plenty of people who will passionately tell me why I'm wrong, but I don't know that they'll have any actual facts to tell me it. I also think that most people haven't really read what's in the Inflation Reduction Act and why this is such a big deal. And I want to give you sort of a premise here. So this is being lauded as like a major accomplishment for Democrats because they've been fighting for months to pass this huge social climate policy mandate, right? And they want to see more taxes on the rich, and they want to look at large investments to make healthcare and prescription drugs cheaper, more affordable. We want to go after massive global change and fighting climate change and all these great cool things. But wait a minute, it's like wait. Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, well, let's talk about like what's actually in this for a second. Okay, well, first of all, this was for a lot of people don't really realize this. It started with the Build Back Better bill, is what Biden ran on, and which is why he really, for the most part, got those votes to come out, aside from so many people hating Trump. But it's essentially just the Inflation Reduction Act is really just a smaller, lighter weight version of Build Back Better. Right. And the
Manchin was the main reason it had to go down there.
Exactly. Right. And the whole play here was that they wanted to make big investments in what we're calling our social safety net. The problem, as I'll explain here in just a second, is it's not that simple. We still haven't actually gotten to the root cause. And I think this is a theme of everything that's wrong with everything we're about to talk about. No one has the guts to deal with root cause analysis and solving for those problems. Right. Like, here's the big provisions that came out of this bill: a 15% corporate minimum tax rate. So the details: corporations with at least $1 billion in income will have a new tax rate of 15%. Taxes on individuals and households won't be increased. Stock buybacks by corporations will face a 1% excise tax. Okay. I don't see what that has to do with inflation reduction, but okay. Prescription drug price reform. One of the most significant provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act will allow Medicare to negotiate the price of certain prescription drugs, bringing down the price beneficiaries will pay for their medications. Medicare recipients will have a $2,000 cap on annual out-of-pocket prescription drug costs starting in wait a minute, 2025. Well, we're in 2022, so this does nothing for anyone who's facing challenges right now. Inflation is cyclical. Of course, it's going to go down in a couple of years. This is sort of like just feeding into the fact that, like, hey, this could do nothing, but I'll get credit for it anyways. Okay, well, let's find something else here that seems to really make a ton of sense for Build Back Better or for inflation reduction. Okay, well, IRS tax enforcement. IRS has been sounding the alarm for years about being underfunded and being unable to deliver on its duties. The bill invests $80 billion in the nation's tax agency. Now, in theory, this is $80 billion of new spend, but in theory, it'll mean a return of that $80 billion because they'll find more than presumably $80 billion to bring back in. I don't know that they've actually shown how they're going to do that yet, but again, it sounds good when it comes to getting votes.
Sean, don't you also think you could invest like 5 to 10 billion in software that could automate this whole thing versus IRS agents? Like, it would be the most complex piece of software ever written, but it would not be $80 billion.
I'm 39 years old. Let me tell you a quick story. When I file my taxes, which are pretty complex, it requires typically 2 to 3 people to help me do it. Then I'm always late, so I have to pay a penalty because it takes forever to get it done.
Yep.
And then miraculously, 1 month later, I get a letter from the IRS that says, "Oh, you owe another $1,642.88." It's like, you already know what I owed. Why did I have to go through all that work to file?
Right.
Because it's a racket. It's like everything else. It's a racket. I don't care if you think there should be high taxes on the rich and no taxes on the poor. It should be an even 15% for everyone or 30% of everyone. The problem with the IRS isn't $80 billion. It's the complexity of the goddamn tax code that makes it impossible for normal people to do their taxes and know what they actually owe. If you knew that everyone owed within reason a certain amount, okay, it works. But the way progressive taxes work, it's very hard to understand. So a lot of times the hate is passed on to people with money, and it's something along the lines of they don't pay their fair share. And of course, the biggest bullshit of all is that now we're talking about like, oh, well, Elon Musk only pays 2%. And you're like, what? Wait a minute, he doesn't pay 2%. They go, well, of his net worth. Like, well, one thing has nothing to do with the other. This is just the way we politicize even wealth. And it's really sad. And it again, though, to your point, it speaks to the fact that there's major issues with the tax code. And what do we do to reduce inflation? We throw more money at it. Kind of doesn't sound like anti-inflation to me, but what do I know? Okay, so here's another one. The Affordable Care Act subsidy extension. So currently, medical insurance premiums under the ACA are subsidized by the federal government to lower premiums. Subsidized via taxes that someone else is paying, by the way. These subsidies, which were scheduled to expire at the end of this year, will be extended through, once again, 2025. Approximately 3 million Americans could lose their health insurance if these weren't extended. How many people approximately do we have in the US, would you say?
330 million.
330 million. So we're talking about potentially 1% of Americans would lose their health insurance if it wasn't extended. Now, I actually believe that matters. 1% or 0.1%, it's still 3 million people. But it sort of speaks to the fact that this program doesn't seem to be making sense for the amount of money that the program costs. If only 1% of Americans are using it, surely there must have been a better way, like getting to the root cause of why insurance companies are paying so much they have to have subsidies in the first place. But this was a really easy way to do nothing, but just make it sound good. Nothing changed. It was just an extension of what already existed. The last one I'll bring up, just because I want to close the loop on it, is energy security and climate change investments. Talk about the most vague explanation. The bill includes numerous investments in climate protection, including, here we go again, tax credits for households to offset energy costs, investments in clean energy production, and tax credits aimed at reducing carbon emissions. There has not even been any iota of proof that these things are actually working, let alone the fact that we should continue to throw money at them. Because what we're doing, once again, is instead of getting to the root cause problem of why we're having such high inflated prices in energy, because we're not solving the problems at the root level, we're just throwing money at it. And what do? We tie it right back to tax. So I want you to think about this. 80 billion for more IRS agents to tax people more, but way more tax credits and ways to find tax loopholes for households. It's like, no,
it's all circular.
This is not right. The last thing I want to say about this, because I think it's important. So according to early studies, okay, what they're saying is that the Inflation Reduction Act likely won't reduce prices at all. So this is according to Penn Wharton's budget model, also known as the PWBM. There's a low confidence the legislation will have any impact on inflation. This is a nonpartisan research-based organization out of UPenn. They create economic analysis on public policy, right? So I'm just sharing that.
Right.
So now here's the problem. Now Manchin goes on CNN and says, well, he disagrees with the study. Okay. A politician disagrees with a scientifically approached research model to study economic impact of policies. Now, on the other hand, of course, the Congressional Budget Office, a federal agency that provides budget and economic information to Congress, says the bill will barely make a dent on inflation in the near term and might actually make it worse. So the CBO estimates it will have a negligible effect on inflation in 2022. In 2023, it will change inflation somewhere between, you ready for this? 0.1 percentage point lower or higher. So I just have to stop there and say, and not to drone on about this, but we talk a lot about big global things. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars, which already creates inflation because we have to print that money,
right,
by offering more tax loopholes and more costs that, according to even Congress's own people, will not do anything to improve the situation and might make it worse. Yet we're all applauding a Inflation Reduction Act. And it speaks to the issues that we're dealing with, like you kicked off a second ago. Powell comes out and basically says, like, look, things are going to get bad. There's no other way of saying it. We're not going to sugarcoat it. Powell, in my opinion, is doing the best he can.
Yeah,
I don't think he's doing a bad job at all. I think he has no choice but to slowly ramp up the rates while also reducing the balance sheet. He has no choice. This is 101 macroeconomics. He has to do this. The problem is politically, it's not a good move because it makes it look like, well, why aren't we, prices are going up, lower the rates. It's like, dude, we have to get back on track from an inflation perspective. And I'll tell you why. Just to stay on this trend of macro, we're going to jump over the Atlantic Ocean for a second here. In the UK, energy prices have hit what I would say are cataclysmic levels. People are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to heat and cool their homes. Electric bills are through the roof, gas and energy through the roof. And they're saying, well, basically Putin put us in a bad position. And it's like, well, yeah, Putin's one weapon against Europe, putting sanctions against him, was to shut off the flow of energy. He's done that. Now, the same people that are sanctioning him are complaining about the fact that they have high prices on energy, et cetera. And I'm going to do a full little circle here back to a couple of quick things. I'm sorry to go on a...
No, you're good. You're good. This is good.
But we've got a fake Inflation Reduction Act here. We've got UK, by the way, it's the middle class I'm talking about. We're getting killed on inflation in the US. Middle class in the UK is getting absolutely smashed on energy prices. Now we've got Ukraine in a prolonged invasion. Russia has not even slowed one bit, and they're shutting off oil to everyone in Europe. And in the US, what do we then do? Well, we're going to cancel some student loans. And
$300 billion of student loans.
$300 billion. And the problem is, again, the people who are really for these things, which, by the way, I think there's nothing wrong with helping anyone. And there's a lot of people who are there's a massive amount of people on both sides of this who are very angry one way or the other. I'm actually sort of very indifferently in the middle, where I don't think anyone should suffer. And I also think that sometimes things aren't fair. So something can both be unfair and still maybe not a bad thing at the same time. So this is one of those things where, like, at the end of the day, it's happening, whether you like it or not. It just is. If you're lucky enough to get advantage from it, hey, good for you. Hopefully you don't go out and lease a BMW and you do something proactive with your money. The problem is people are like, well, what's the big deal? It's not like it exists. It's like, no, guys, like when they look at these budgets, the interest they were going to earn on those federal loans was in our budgets. So we're just pretending like that money's not there now. And what's the resolution? Tax the rich, right? And all the while, from a global perspective, is this spinning wheel of prices are going up, problems are going up, prices are going up, problems are going up. Again and again and again, we're hearing the same story. And all we do is fight with ourselves, right? On the one hand, I'm going to talk specifically to what I see on social media. You got the people who are screaming, I want my student loans erased, are saying, well, what about the PPP loans? Why the hell should they get that money and not have to pay it back?
Right.
And another group of people are saying, why the hell are we giving money to Ukraine? We don't have anything to do with Ukraine. And then another group of people are saying it's this and saying it's that. I think it was our very first episode of this show we did, where I really talked about sort of that connectivity that exists and how like massively immature and short-sighted it is to look at these things as individual pieces, right? It's
Yep.
one big piece that exists on a web of interconnected issues. And like you get the people who are screaming about like, well, what about the PPP loans? And you're like, okay, well, you can probably name 12 people who maybe shouldn't have gotten them, but there are probably like 80,000 people who kept their business open and kept their employees paid.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And sure, there's some kids who went to school for gender studies and art history of Easter eggs, but that's not as many as social media makes it out to be. There's a lot of people who actually are struggling and working hard and first generation to go to school. 10K is not going to kill you. And at the same time, should we let people in Ukraine just get mauled and murdered and bombed by the Russians? No, we shouldn't do that either. And you know why we shouldn't? Because we need to get that energy flowing again to help Europe, our greatest trade partner across the ocean. It's like we just can't keep doing this stupid, silly stuff where it's all about votes. We're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in the US, we're seeing it everywhere. We've made everything so political that now even inflation is political. I mean, my goodness gracious. Inflation is a natural occurring process that exists in a healthy economy. And now we're passing acts to reduce inflation that increase inflation. I mean, this is where we are from a macroeconomic perspective. Now, my final piece on this, because I don't want to drag it on all night. If the people who are watching the show on a regular basis, I'm assuming, are probably into the world of investing and thinking about personal finance, you have to get really good at understanding what the long tail things that are going to happen. So you're seeing this Inflation Act get passed. You're seeing the student loan relief get passed. You're seeing things like this getting passed because Democrats are in power. I just saw a study this afternoon. It was on Bloomberg. I forget who put the study out, so I don't want to misquote it. But as it stands right now, it looks like Democrats have the edge in the midterms.
Yeah.
So as an investor, you need to prepare yourself that more of these things are going to continue to happen. And what will that do to the economy? What will it do to the Fed? What will it do to the stock market? Because it's predictable. We have to look at the historical data to understand what has happened in the past. But let's be very clear here. We have a very malleable president who's going to do what he's told by the Democratic Party, clearly. And they're in a place right now where they're looking to give as much relief as possible across the board. At least it seems that way. And if that continues, we need to be prepared for what that means in combination with the moves the Fed has to make. So on the one hand, the Fed is being extremely aggressive. On the other hand, Democratic leadership is being very aggressive in what I would call vote gathering, but also in what I hope and believe is to try to help. But ultimately, it is political. So then the question becomes, what's next on the agenda if they win midterms? And we know we have to have a Fed that stays strong, right? That's where the challenge of being an investor is and understanding the macroeconomic connections here. I could go on for 12 hours. I'm not going to do it. You can probably even tell, like, I want to say more things on this. I won't. But I think it just speaks to the fact that, well, we all fight with each other in the US about right and left and right and wrong and who should get what and why you don't get enough and who it's not fair to and all this. Like,
It's happening regardless.
It's going to happen regardless, and it's going to happen around the world, and it's going to impact us one way or another. We have to get away from this silliness of, well, why are we giving money to Ukraine and to college and to PPP? It's like, listen, this is just the normal state of affairs of where we live and the way it is in the U.S. And this is the way it's going to be for a while because this is what we've gotten ourselves into. And until inflation levels out.
If inflation has peaked at 9.1, do you still think, even though we're doing all this stuff that is kind of anti-logical to reducing inflation, it'll naturally go down? Or do you think it'll just take longer for it to go down because of what we're doing?
It's the fundamental understanding of economics. If you know nothing about economics and we want to drill it down to the most basic root of it, it's a cycle. And cycles can extend or shorten, but it's still going to be a cycle. I have no ability to predict the length of a cycle, but it will naturally come down because there is just in sort of the credit flow and income flow perspective of a cycle, there just simply is a point where people can't afford anymore. And there is no more credit to be had. And interest rates have risen too high to borrow. So the prices have to come down. The question is how long and how far out will they be drawn out? Seeing things like what we're seeing here with like this Inflation Reduction Act and like, I mean, California is a perfect example of like the extreme of what we're seeing in the US. I would almost look at that as a bellwether in a strange sense to say, like, if that's the extreme, this is kind of, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't even say this out loud, but California and Florida to me are like the dichotomies of the US, right? That's the demarcation point, is there, those are going to be my two bell curve points. And what I need to understand is where in between those the average person fits. And the average person is very reasonable. They work hard. They try to do right. They pay their bills. They try to plan for the future, but life gets tough. Those are the people that I want to pay attention to, because when they're saying like, look, I can't buy a car, it's too expensive, I can't buy a new house or refinance, the rates are too high, then the banks have no choice but to listen, because if the majority of people, which is basically everyone, says I can't do it anymore, then they have to change what they're doing. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for, right? From my perspective.
Yeah, and I think that, it's crazy because we have the 360 on the S&P, we got to the 430s, everyone felt like, and then one comment by it's like it felt unnatural the whole time because like it's still 8.5%.
Yeah.
And then you get student loans, all this stuff, and we're coming right back. It's just it's so interesting being an investor at this time because you're really just seeing how it's all happening.
Like exactly to your point. I was really busy today, so I didn't even look at the market once. But at the end of the day, I walked out of my office, turned on Bloomberg for like 32 seconds, basically. And essentially what they were saying was like the market was down about 1% and clawed its way all the way back up to being just about, when I turned it on, was about down 0.25. When you think about that, that is a huge whipsaw in the day. And what I'm noticing more and more is we're seeing a lot of vertical lines, whether down or up, and then a climb or a fall afterwards. And this is like the perfect example of why it pays to be a calm investor who knows what you're getting into, why you're getting into it, and the ability to hold long term. Whether it's indexes, stocks, real estate, whatever, right? You just have to be able to understand that we're in a cycle. This is a normal thing. And the problem is if you're under a certain age, I think this really bears repeating too. If you're under a certain age, this is the first time you've ever seen anything like this.
Yep.
Whereas like very simple, if you're over a certain age, this is another day. It's like, markets go down. I'm going to double down on everything for the next couple months and see what happens. I was actually I knew we were doing the show tonight, so I called my buddy who's a really good realtor, but also understands investing. And I was telling him about this deal that I'm working on getting done. And I was asking what he's seeing in the market. And he said he just today was outbid by like 19 other bidders on a property. So he said, I'm not seeing what they're talking about on TV in the major cities, certainly not in the suburbs. Some areas have already started to fall. They're predicting that a lot of areas are going to fall. I have no doubt that they're going to fall because it's inevitable. The interest rates are the lagging indicator that then creates the lag that pulls home prices behind it. But the reality is there are plenty of people who are ready, willing, and waiting to jump in and have been saving for a long time to act when prices fall. That group of people acts as a synthetic floor to some degree because they're ready to jump in and take that inventory. I'll give you the 30 seconds on this too, is like this deal that I'm trying to get done. A developer had built a whole bunch of single family homes, and now with the market going down, wants to make a deal to get rid of them. So I just said, I'll take them all if you give me a price. And I'm structuring it because I know lenders want to keep doing deals. I'm structuring it in a way where I'm bringing other properties in as collateral instead of even putting cash in the deal. So it just goes to show that if you know what you're doing and you understand the way these cycles work, it's advantage you and disadvantage to the market. And as long as you strike at the right time, no matter what the topic that we're discussing is, there's always an opportunity. Home prices aren't high, rates are low. Rates aren't high, home prices are low. And the more you start to get that in your head that there's a natural leveling that occurs, but you have to understand, much like when the market's open in the morning of the day, when we're looking at stocks, we might look at something over the course of 8 hours, an individual stock, say. When we're looking at real estate or currency and commodity levels, we have to extend that 8 hours into sometimes 8 days, 8 months, 8 years.
Yeah.
And as long as you know the time frame of the cycle for the asset you're looking at, it becomes very easy to know where you sit. And like anything, 6 months ago, I could never make the deal that I'm trying to make right now. I'm literally couldn't make the deal. It would never have happened ever.
Because prices were too high.
prices were too high and they knew they could sell them. Now you're a developer, you want to make sure you don't catch the downside. So what are you going to do? You're going to look for someone to pick up as many things as they can from you and get completely out of the deal, walk with a profit you can make, and wait for the next cycle to turn. This is why developers and investors in real estate tend to get things. I'm not talking like, you own one rental so you understand everything. I mean, like when you're really in the market, you're really buying and selling, you're really understanding how commercial markets are moving. You're following and tracking the sales of land, development timelines, the kind of approvals that are tied in it. You can see what the developers are doing and you can front run that. This goes for any kind of asset class or investing that we're talking about here in general.